of the Illinois Freedom Caucus. We're here today to talk about the budget that's passed the Senate that we're going to see in the House this evening. And I guess one word or a little phrase, you show me your budget and I'll tell you what your priorities are. So we're here today to talk about our priorities and what the Democrats' priorities are and why we think that our priorities better fit the people of Illinois. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the chairman of the Illinois Freedom Caucus, Representative Chris Miller.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for all these rascals that came today. Thank you all for coming out. And like Dan said, my name is Chris Miller. I'm the state representative for the 101st District and also the chairman of the Illinois Freedom Caucus. In just a few hours, the House will begin the process of voting on the budget. Until yesterday, nobody had any idea what the particulars of this budget were because the budget negotiation took place behind doors and basically the Republicans were all locked out. We all know what's wrong with this process, but we also know nothing is going to be done about it. The insiders will laugh at those of us who want to be part of a more open and transparent budget process, but because we don't have the votes in the House or the Senate, that our opposition will be ignored. But is this process really in the best interest of the people of the state of Illinois? And we all know the answer to that is a resounding no. The money being allocated in this budget does not belong to J.B. Pritzker, Chris Welsh, or even Don Harmon. The money being spent belongs to we the people. The question is, are we really acting in the best interest of the citizens in this budget process? We're talking about spending $50.6 billion of taxpayer money. Shouldn't we have more time to consider what is exactly in the budget? Wow, we have more than an hour this year, most likely, to discover what's in the budget, which will be a slight improvement over the budgets of the past. But we have been in session since January. We had the budget address in February. We have had plenty of time to make this process more transparent and more accountable. There's been plenty of time to give the citizens an opportunity to have actually had input into this process. Instead, essentially, three people have decided how to spend $50.6 billion. This process is wrong, and you and the media know it. But until there's enough outrage and enough anger among the electorate, nothing is going to change. The media has an important role to play in telling the story. The one takeaway from this press conference should be that what the Democrats are doing to the people of the state of Illinois is wrong. And once again, the people of the state of Illinois are getting the bohica. So please help us tell the story and let's change Springfield for the better. Some other observations on this budget that we need to address include the sheer amount of money being spent. We're again setting new records for spending here in Illinois. The budget is $1 billion more than the budget that Pritzker actually introduced. Even as year-over-year revenues in April were down $1.8 billion and overall expectations were $800 million than estimated earlier this year. Lawmakers are getting another pay raise, taking our base pay to a whopping $89,600. That's before committee salaries, etc. Most people here will be making over $100,000 for a public service position. Also, we are not extending the Invest in Kids program, which is a travesty. We're adding new programs and new spending while failing to address the long-term solutions to our major fiscal challenges facing our state. The $700 million payment to the Pension Stabilization Fund is not insignificant, but making a balloon payment is not a permanent solution. We need meaningful pension reform if we want to solve the pension crisis. The Democrats act as though this one-time payment is responsible budgeting. The truth is that years of ignoring the pension crisis has made our state pension problem almost insurmountable. Imagine if we had an extra $700 million to spend on something other than paying the pension debt. Because of the majority party's refusal to push long-term solution to pensions, we are forced to continue to pour money into our pension system, which puts tremendous pressure on our budget and does little to solve the problem in a meaningful way. On page 157, the budget allocates more than $7 million for the Commission on Equity and Inclusion. Now let's think about that for a minute. What do they do? Who is in charge? How often do they meet? What is the commissioner paid? Important information like this are things that the people of Illinois should be able to know. On page 29, here's another good one. Line 10 is a line item of $300,000 to Black Lives Matter of Lake County. Another nice gimmick to the political allies of the Democrat Party. The budget is full of giveaways like this at the taxpayers' expense. Finally, this budget allocates hundreds of millions of dollars on programs for services of people who are here illegally. Now think about that for a minute. We're using taxpayer dollars to give away to people that are here illegally. This budget spends 10 times more on services for people who broke our federal immigration laws than we are spending on children forced into failing schools and then entirely killed the Invest in Kids scholarship program. The Democrat leadership cares more about kids residing here illegally than they do about kids in their own neighborhoods who their parents actually voted for the representatives to be here, supposedly representing them here in the State House. We could be helping kids escape failing schools. We could be helping men and women who care for the developmentally disabled. Instead, we are pumping money into programs for illegals. To say these priorities are misguided is the understatement of the year. And that, I yield my time to Brad Holbrook. Representative Holbrook.
Thank you, Representative Miller. State Representative Brad Holbrook, the 107th District. Thanks for being here this afternoon. Earlier this spring session, my colleagues and I did a press conference here to discuss education funding. During this press conference, we highlighted all of the efforts of previous governors to highlight early education. Every governor from George Ryan to J.B. Pritzker has made early childhood education a priority. And yet, here we are again, creating yet another early childhood education program. None of us up here have any issue with spending $250 million on an education program, but we cannot ignore the policies and past precedents when considering the new programs and the new initiatives. The assumption is that the spending more money is going to create better results, but this is not the reality of our education system. I think it's worthwhile to take a look again at how our education spending stacks up to our surrounding states. K-12 spending in Illinois is $16,277 per student for a total of just over $32 billion annually. Indiana spends $10,256 per student for $10.8 billion. Iowa, $11,935 per student for roughly $6.1 billion annually. Kentucky, K-12 schools, $11,278 per student for $7.6 billion. And finally, Wisconsin schools, $12,694 per student for $10.9 billion annually. Wisconsin has the 8th best public schools in the U.S. Wisconsin ranks 5th for quality, tying with Minnesota, and the highest median SAT score. Wisconsin's pupil-to-teacher ratio is 15:1, lower than the U.S. average. Illinois is ranked 15th best school. Kentucky and Iowa rank 19th and 20th respectively, while Indiana is ranked 22nd. The point of all of this is Wisconsin spends nearly $4,000 less per student than Illinois, and their schools rank much higher than Illinois. We spend an average of $5,000 more per student than Kentucky, and yet our schools rank 4 spots higher than in the Bluegrass State. Illinois is spending a substantially higher amount per pupil than our surrounding state. yet in terms of academics is producing very similar results. There is no correlation between money spent and outcomes. Again, no one has any issue with spending the money on education, but given what we are spending on education and given the fact the surrounding states are doing as much or more, in one case, more with fewer dollars than being spent, we must demand accountability in education spending. It is time we ask, what are we getting on all the state spending on education? Results matter. And with that, Representative McLaughlin.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you for the invitation from the Freedom Caucus today. Martin McLaughlin, 52nd District, Northern Illinois. Happy to be here, and thank you for letting me make a few comments. 3 weeks ago, I was on the floor 2 days before the immigration rules were about to change, and I realized we had a significant problem. I asked our staff to provide to me the amount of money that had been sent to Chicago based on the illegal immigrants, illegal migrants, whatever the current vernacular is, and frankly, to me it's not relevant. But what is relevant is the amount of money that was sent. $250 million between August and January of last year. Now it looks like we're going to spend another $1 billion too. Priorities for me as a former business owner and also running a town are incredibly important in the budget process. And I think one of my colleagues mentioned our priorities are completely out of whack. We all get solicited, as you know, in the media by people that come down here to allocate wisely tax dollars. I have had people in my office from Misericordia Home for developmentally disabled looking for assistance. They're not getting paid enough on an hourly basis in SILAS to take care of our most vulnerable citizens. I've had a number of people come in for sexual abuse victims and a number of centers that they need to continue to operate. There wasn't enough money in the budget to do that. And finally, I'm fortunate to be on the Illinois Kidney Foundation, where Black and brown communities are being underserved. In all three of those instances, I would like to say to them, look them in the eye and say, absolutely, we're allocating our budget properly in Illinois. But instead we find out in the late hours of last night that we're going to send $1.2 billion or more to non-citizens from the state of Illinois. To me, that is a malfeasance of executive authority at a level that I can't understand. I can't understand as a former mayor who ran an actual balanced budget for 8 years, reducing spending. To me, it is something that the citizens of the state need to know about. They need to be aware of it, and they need to hold their representatives accountable for this fiscal malfeasance. So I want to thank the Freedom Caucus for being here today, and I want to hand this off now to Representative Wilhauer. Thank you.
Thanks, Marty. You look good up here. Well, appreciate you guys being here. Appreciate these other guys speaking here. I want to talk a little bit more about education. That's a big priority for me in Springfield. I'm the minority spokesperson on the K through 12 Education Appropriations Committee. Obviously, education is a big part of the budget. It should be a big part of the budget. We talk a lot about education funding and spending money on education. We talk a lot about how we're underfunding education, but I think it's important to note that we're spending more money on public government education in this state than what we have ever spent, and as Representative Halbrook alluded to, we're spending a lot more per pupil than pretty much every state around here. So we pour money into this education system consistently in this state, and although we do all that, since we've done this education funding formula that's substantially increased our level of spending, the proficiency results in reading and math have gone down. Now we can talk about the factors, why that has happened. Sure, COVID had some to do with it. That trajectory was already there. And we see in the shadow of all of this stuff that's going on, all of the negative results, this year we're piling on another $250 million for the Early Start initiative. And like we have talked about, nobody is opposed to spending money on education and even early education. The fact remains, are the results there that signify that these are good measures that our state, that our education bureaucracy is actually ready to deal with. I think that we should do a lot more focusing on getting our proficiency levels up in through the K through 8 programs before we pile a bunch more onto the State Board of Education that really over the past 3 years has done a really dismal job in almost every aspect. Nobody disputes the goal of educating kids. It's how we do it. It's how do we trust the people that's spending this money? Do we trust that they're prioritizing it wisely? You know, just continue to pour billions of dollars into an education system that has basically failed our kids is not what we should be doing. And you know, we just want to ensure that this money is spent effectively. And I want to talk about an effective program that I think Brad and Chris both talked about a little bit here, a program that was a very, very important part of making the education funding formula bipartisan. It's to invest in kids. You know, if a bill to extend this program were to come to the House and the Senate floor for a vote independently, I think that it would probably pass with bipartisan support. It's certainly going to be fascinating to see that. You know. But when we go onto the House floor to begin debating this budget, the Democrats are going to lecture us about not caring enough about kids because we're opposed to this budget. They're going to say that opposing this historic education spending is cruel, and they're going to accuse us of not caring about kids. But it's because we care about kids, because we actually care about not just money in education, but outcomes in education, something that's hardly ever talked about here. That's why we oppose this budget. It's a big reason why, among other things. Spending money for the sake of spending money is not a real education plan. And gifting these special interest groups everything they want is not a real solution to the education needs of this state. If we really cared about kids in this state, if we really cared about outcomes, if we really cared about kids that are underprivileged in a lot of ways out of no fault of our own, we'd extend this program because this program is effective. There's 9,700 students that are receiving scholarships in the 2022-2023 school year, and there are 22,000 kids that are on a waiting list for this program. To me, that screams that this is an effective, credible program that people in communities all over our state support. 22,000 kids. This program is a success, so you know, when programs like this are a success and they get outside the bounds of the education bureaucracy, outside the bounds of the powerful special interests bureaucracy, it's a threat to those folks. And when there's a threat, they have to get rid of it. And you know, I don't want to mince words on this. I'm not known for mincing words in this place too much. This one and only reason that this program is not getting extended tomorrow morning in the budget is because the teachers union. The Illinois Education Association does not want it, okay? They don't want it. They're putting pressure on members of both parties to oppose it, and that's the only reason. So we're literally denying people the ability to make a real difference in education of kids to protect the interest of a teachers union and frankly the campaign donations that they make in this state. If we've seen anything over the past 30 years, these special interest groups have done everything but put the kids as the #1 priority in this state. The Invest in Kids program cannot be allowed to exist because it exposes the failures of our education system and the failures of the teachers' unions that drive it. When families are given a choice, oftentimes, especially in the underprivileged areas, they choose to send their kids to schools that aren't the failing government schools. In a lot of cases, it's a no-brainer. But instead of helping kids get a good education and escape failing schools, we're doubling down on failed policies, and our kids and our next generation are really facing the brunt of it. We're the only state in the nation that's going backwards on this stuff. And like these guys said, it's time to demand accountability in how we spend money, and we need to prioritize kids, not the special interests, like we do every day in this state, not just on education, but pretty much on everything else. But with that, we'll take some questions.
Well, the first thing that was said in this news conference